what good thing can I do to get everlasting life or eternal life? How can I get into heaven through doing a good thing? Now, what I would have answered, and Jesus didn't answer, but what I'd have answered, it says, you can't do any good thing to get into heaven, because it's not about doing good things at all. But Jesus actually answered slightly differently. And that's not because Jesus got the answer wrong. That's because Jesus wanted to teach the man an important lesson. Because actually the man was asking something far beyond what he realized. And I think that he didn't understand at all about heaven. He didn't understand who Jesus was. And he thought it was all about just doing good things. Now, secondly, I think that the man already had an idea in his head of what Jesus might suggest that he does. Now, Jesus was indeed a teacher. Not a school teacher, like some of you might have in mind, but he was a teacher in the sense that he taught people to understand the Bible that they had in those days. It was really, our Bible is a complete book now. In those days they had like the first front piece of it, what we call the Old Testament. Obviously the New wasn't written at that time. And so this man would have expected Jesus, because Jesus was teaching about their Bible, so he would have expected him to say, what you need to do, of course, is make sure that you keep all of the commandments that Moses gave you hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Now, we summarized those commandments last time with our 10 simple rules. Okay? The 10 simple rules. And so Jesus starts to quote from the 10 simple rules. And in actual fact, if you look at them as they are in their order, let me just put my lollipop back on for a moment. If you look at them in the order here, Jesus starts with number 6. And Jesus says, and I'm going to paraphrase with my version rather than the version straight out of the Bible. So, do not harm anyone, or do not murder. Jesus starts with that one. And you can imagine that this man has a big smile on his face. I've never murdered anyone. There aren't many people who have, thankfully. But no, I've never broken that one. Jesus says, secondly, he says, don't forget, never hurt your husband or wife by falling in love with somebody else. Do not commit adultery, is the way that's often phrased. And the man says, I've never done that either. I've never hurt my wife through falling in love with somebody else. I've always been very faithful to my wife. So Jesus says, do not steal anything. I've never stolen anything. I'm a rich man. I don't need to steal. The sad thing is that, very often there are 2 reasons why people steal. Mainly 2 reasons. One is that they're greedy and they want more and things that they shouldn't have. And the second one is that they're too poor. And so they steal because they need something. And Jesus says to him, do not steal. And the man says, I don't need to steal. I'm a wealthy man. I've got everything I need and more. So Jesus says, well then don't tell lies. And the man looks at Jesus and he says, tell lies? Can you imagine me telling lies? There's something else that we know about this man, because not only is he rich and that he's young, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell us the story. And although it may not come out in all of those accounts of it, we know that he's called a ruler. Now, that doesn't mean that he's about, 12 inches long or something, and made of wood. But a ruler in those days meant a synagogue ruler. Now, the synagogue was like the church. So what we might say in our church, if we were trying to update and put it into modern days, he was one of the deacons of the church, all right? So he says, I'm one of the officials in the church. Do you think I would tell lies? Of course I wouldn't. And so Jesus says to him, do not want something that belongs to somebody else. Or, as Jesus summarizes it, he says, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, that actually wasn't strictly one of the 10 commandments, but it sums it up nicely. Do not want your neighbor's belongings. So he says, love your neighbor as yourself. And if you love your neighbor, the person around you, he says, you won't do them any harm. So he says, love your neighbor as yourself. And he says, I'm really good to my neighbors. I've never done any harm for them. I've only ever helped them out. I'm a good man. And then strangely, having gone through commandments 6 to 10, Jesus jumps all the way back to number 5. Love and respect your parents. Now, we don't know why Jesus did that. The Bible doesn't tell us why Jesus suddenly jumped back to number 5. But if you look in Matthew's version of the account, in Mark's version of the account, and in Luke's version of the account, they all tell us the same thing. Jesus got from 6 to 10 and then jumped back to number 5. There must have been a reason. And it's just possible, that the man had an issue with his parents. Now, we don't know that, and it's very silly to try and read too much into that. But there must have been a reason why Jesus highlighted this. He says, you've got to love and respect your parents. Very appropriate, isn't it, for Mother's Day, that we have something like this. However, the man says, actually, he says, I've done all of these things. I am the closest thing, Jesus, you will ever find to a perfect person. That's what he's saying. I am almost perfect. But clearly, Jesus, there must still be something else. Do you know what I think he was doing? I think he was looking at Jesus' disciples. Who knows any of Jesus' disciples? I don't mean know them personally. Okay. But who knows of them? Any names and anything about them? What they used to do? Anything at all about Jesus' disciples? Let's have, from this table, we'll go around one of Jesus' disciples.
Peter.
Peter, okay. And what did Peter do? Do you know what he did for a job?
Fish. He used to go fishing.
Okay, he used to go fishing. He was a fisherman. Anybody else got another hand?
Matthew.
Matthew, okay. So we've got Matthew. Do you know what Matthew did for a job? He wasn't fishing. Okay. Anyone know what Matthew did for a job? Tax collector. Okay, he was a tax collector. So he used to steal from people, actually, because that's what the tax collectors used to do in those days. I'm saying nothing about today, but in those days they used to steal from people. Okay, another of Jesus' disciples.
Thomas.
Thomas, okay, do we know anything about Thomas?
Was he the person who said, I won't believe Jesus is alive until I can touch his holes in him?
Exactly, yeah. So he got the name Doubting Thomas, didn't he? He wouldn't believe Jesus had risen from the dead. What we're actually discovering here is that we've got a fisherman who wasn't very well educated. We've got a tax collector who was known to be a bit of a thief and a dishonest man. And we've got Thomas, whose faith was very weak, obviously. And if we were to go around all the other disciples, we find that all of them have their faults. None of them are perfect. And I think this man looked at Jesus' disciples and said, Jesus, you can do better than this. Imagine, instead of having the riffraff off the street that you came and... Because Jesus did that. He walked along the street and he says, hey, you, come and follow me. Leave behind your fishing nets. Forget fishing, come and follow me. Hey, you, Matthew, leave your tax collecting shop and come and follow me instead. And he called all these people off the streets. And this man says, you don't have to have riffraff. You could have one of the church deacons instead. What an offer. Have one of the church deacons. One of the officials of the church could be one of your main key followers. And I think he expected Jesus to say, yes, of course that's who I want. But surprisingly, Jesus didn't. Rather than saying to the man in answer to his question, what else do I lack? Jesus doesn't say, do you know what, I think you are nearly perfect after all. Jesus says to him, there's still one thing. You are a very wealthy man. There's nothing wrong with wealth. There's nothing wrong with having money. If we put God first. So he says to him, let me test you. If you really want to be this complete, perfect man that you're talking about, I lay before you a challenge, says Jesus. Go and sell all your possessions because they're really important to you. More important than anything else, they're important to you. Sell your possessions, give the money away to people who actually need it, and then you can come and follow me. And the man thought, wow, that's so hard. These are the greatest things I've got, my possessions, my house. I mean, I've worked hard to get my house to being just the perfect house. I mean, there is no expense spared on this house. I mean, I have the latest everything. All the gadgets in my kitchen. I mean, everything. Every latest thing, I've got it. And he says, and then, just to think about all those holidays that I have. I mean, I just love going to Egypt on holiday. To Sheikh El Sharem or wherever it is. Sharm El Sheikh or something like that, isn't it? I just love going there. And, I won't be able to do that anymore. And then, my chariot, my BMW chariot, I'm going to have to get rid of that too. I mean, it was only 2 horsepower, but it was a good one. The best that was around in those days. And, he started to weigh it all up and he said, this is going to be too much for me. You're asking too much of me, Jesus. So I started to ask myself the question, what is Jesus actually doing here? Now, on your table, you have got various fruits and vegetables, and up here we have our winning specimens. Okay? So the thing is that in order to judge those specimens, when I asked our judging panels, what did you look for? They said things like shape. Things like it looked perfect. There were no blemishes on the skin. Things like it was a good size. There were no signs of looking old. It's looking really fresh. All of those things were what we looked at. And that's the problem, that most of us judge not just fruit and vegetables like that, but we actually judge one another like that too. We look on what we can see and decide what it looks like. Now, the other day, we happened to be just making a salad. Well, I say we. I used, the royal we there, because actually it was Lisa. Okay, Lisa was making a salad the other day, and she got a carrot out, and she peeled this carrot, and she chopped it up to put into the salad, and she took a piece of the carrot, put it in her mouth, and ate it, and she said, this is horrible. Now, to look at that carrot, it looked wonderful on the outside. There were no blemishes. It wasn't, half eaten by some little creature that got into the soil. It was lovely. I mean, it was fresh. You know what happens to carrots, after they've been there a while? They get all bendy and rubbery, don't they? It wasn't like that. I mean, really crisp carrot. No black bits coming on it. Nothing. But to taste it, it was horrible. It was flavourless. It was just, even a little bit bitter. But there was just nothing there that would make you say, I want to eat this. And the thing is that's how Jesus judges us. Jesus looks at the inside, not the outside. And this rich man thought that Jesus would come along and look at the outside. He'd look at how well he was dressed. He would think, Which part of town do you come from? Oh, the posh area. And he would think, what kind of friends do you have? Oh, they're good company. What sort of job do you have? Oh, you have an excellent job. Plenty of money in the bank. Oh, yeah, I think you'll be perfect to join me. Jesus doesn't look like that. Jesus says, let me look deep into the heart. And Jesus says, it's a bit like tasting the vegetable. Jesus says, let me get inside you, because I think there's something else. That inside, you're bad. Inside, you've gone rotten. Inside, you're more interested in yourself than you are about other people. That's your problem, says Jesus. And I'm going to prove it to you. Jesus wasn't actually saying, if you sell everything, give to the poor, and then come, then you'll get eternal life. He says, let's get over the first hurdle. Do that first, and then we'll talk about the next step. But the man failed with the first task that he was asked to do. So many of us can do that too. We fail at the simplest things that Jesus asks us to do. And I've always maintained that if we find it difficult to obey Jesus on the simple things he asks us to do, we will never obey him when it comes to the difficult things. So this really is at the lowest level of becoming a follower of Jesus. Jesus says, you just do something really simple I ask you to do. If you can do it, we'll try something slightly harder. And if you can't, then we're back to square one. Jesus and his disciples continued together. The man went away very sad because when he realized how much wealth he had to give away, it was too hard for him. But Jesus, with his disciples, has a conversation. And in that conversation, the disciples said to him, we're discouraged now we've heard this, because we think that if somebody like this man, who looks so good on the outside, because they weren't looking on the inside either, somebody who looks so good on the outside, such a perfect, wealthy, educated, upstanding member of the community can't become your follower, what hope is there for the rabble like us? And Jesus gave some real words of encouragement, because Jesus says, it's not the perfect people I'm looking for. It's not the people who've got everything sorted out, but Jesus has come for people whose lives are in a bit of a mess. Those of us who haven't worked out all the answers to life's problems yet. Those are the ones Jesus wants. Those are the ones Jesus can help, because usually it's when we're in that situation where we're prepared to admit that actually I'm incapable of helping myself, then Jesus can help us. And I want to say to you today, it doesn't matter who we are, whether we're young or whether we're mature, whether we're, it doesn't matter who we are. You could be absolutely anybody. But I just want you to remember this, that all Jesus wants is for you to be open and honest with him. And if we've got our faults, and we've all got our faults, let's face it, just to say to him, Jesus, I know I'm not perfect. Please help me in this area where I'm lacking. Help me to be a better person. Help me to just be nicer to the people around me. Help me in the temptations that I face day by day. Help me just to be obedient to my parents. Jesus, one of the last things he said to the man when he was going through these 10 commandments, of course, was love and respect your parents. And maybe some of us are saying, actually, I really struggle with that. Jesus, help me to love and respect my parents. Jesus, help me not to tell lies. Help me to be an honest person. Help me in all these things, because I know that I need help in these. I can't do it on my own. And I think if we were to come to him and ask that, I'm sure, from experience, I am sure he will give you all the help that you need. Sometimes it's a struggle. Sometimes it can take a while. Sometimes it requires us to keep going, and we have to persevere quite hard sometimes. But we can do it. And, I think that what Jesus was saying to his disciples is this. He says, don't worry about this man and, his situation, thinking that because he's so good and you're not, there's no hope for you. There is plenty of hope for each and every one of us. So he says this strange thing. He says it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven. And of course, that would have caused a few people to smile and laugh, because nobody's going to get a camel through the eye of a needle. Impossible. And so therefore, he says, of course it's impossible for some people. But he says, the things that God asks them to do are very difficult. But for you, he says, just trust me. Follow my words, follow my commands, do what I say. And most importantly of all, remember, it's not about how good you look on the outside. What really counts is what's on the inside. I'm going to just invite you to pray with me and just to ask the Lord to help us in this particular area in our lives too. Let's pray.